Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Inside Injuries podcast for Week 14 of the NFL season and the first week of the fantasy playoffs for most fantasy leagues. My name is Tim McCullough. I'm your host, and with me, as always, from Inside Injuries is Virginia Zakis. Virginia, how are you this afternoon?
Doing well. Lots to cover today with the playoffs approaching.
Yeah, we've lost a few players this week, a few key players this week. That are going to be completely gone now from the game, and we've got to talk about them. I know we've got some others who are going to miss this week and could be back in later weeks. Why don't we start with some of those players and begin first with James Conner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to sorely miss him, certainly this week. But how long is he going to be out? When can we expect him to return?
So Connor's injury looked like a classic high ankle sprain, which is a little more concerning than just a standard ankle sprain and generally takes longer to heal and it tends to linger. Right now, we're showing a grade 2 injury, which indicates a moderate sprain, and that comes with a 4-week optimal recovery time. When the Steelers early on in the week were saying it was just a contusion, we said there was no way that was the case. And then, of course, later they came out and said it was a sprain. He's already ruled out for week 14. I would be very, very surprised if he plays week 15. And realistically, the team should sit him until week 17 if they can afford to. But I think their decision could end up coming down to where they are in the playoff standings. But if they want him healthy for the playoffs, they really should sit him through the end of the regular season to be safe.
Right, and of course we're talking about the NFL playoffs there. The fantasy playoffs are a different story, and it does appear as though Connor's going to miss at least this week and probably next week and possibly even week 16, the championship week. So let's talk a little bit about some of his replacements coming in. We've got a lot of questions about those players. The first one being, who is going to be the primary replacement for him? And it looks right now like it's going to be Jalen Samuels. Now, he's primarily known as a pass-catching back, and he's already done a pretty good job in that regard this year. He's from 9 targets. He's got 7 receptions, 54 yards so far, averaging 7.7 yards per reception, which is not bad at all. He's only got 12 carries for 31 yards, so 2.6 yards per carry. And so we're a little skeptical about whether or not he's going to be able to be a ball carrier for these guys, at least on the heavy basis that Connor was in there for. So it looks like they may get Stephen Ridley involved. Now, Ridley he really hasn't had a good season. No, I'm being a little disingenuous. He hasn't had a good season really since 2012, 2013, when he was with the Patriots, and he was a force to be contended with back then. But he really hasn't done anything in the years since. He's been nothing more than a backup on most teams, and he's bounced around a little bit. I don't like Ridley at all. I don't think he's worth picking up, not in any type of league, at least unless it's an extremely deep league. I would go with Samuels, though. I think because of his pass-catching ability, he'll have value right away in PPR leagues, and we'll have to see how he does as a runner out of the backfield. It'll be interesting to see how he does. Of course, the Pittsburgh blocking scheme is perfect for a guy like Connor, who is a big back and is able to bull his way up the middle. Samuels is not that kind of guy. He's a smaller back, relies on his quickness and his cutting to get his yardage. He needs to get out into open space. So we'll have to see what happens with him going forward, but I would definitely pick him up in PPR formats. All right, let's move on to San Francisco 49ers running back Matt Breida. Is he going to play this week?
So Breida has already been ruled out for week 14, which I was actually pretty surprised about because he's been playing through this ankle injury for so long, and the 49ers seem to have been okay with just letting him try to tough it out. But he's been a high risk since, I believe, early October when this injury started. He aggravated it before the game last Sunday, tried to play through it, and then aggravated it again at the end of a long reception and then didn't return. So I'm not really surprised because this has been going on so long that he made the injury worse. When a player tries to play through a series of ankle injuries like this, the ligaments are stretched out, making them more susceptible to another ankle injury and making it even worse the next time around. So very happy to see them shut him down. We're showing a 4-week optimal recovery time. And with them out of the playoff picture, I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to either shut him down or really play it safe and sit him at least the next few weeks. It's the decision they should make. I just don't know if they're going to do it. But again, we've also heard a lot of people saying things like he's made of glass, he just can't stay healthy. And in reality, if he'd just taken a few weeks off, I don't think we'd be saying these things. But because he tried to play through it from the beginning, he's made this much worse than it ever should have been. And this is one of those cases where his injury was just managed very, very poorly over the last few months.
And it's funny, I can't really understand why the San Francisco 49ers did this to him. In a way, I mean, they're responsible ultimately. They put him out on the field, whether he wants to play or not. They're the guys that put him on the field. They didn't really have to do this because they seem to have running backs galore who can step up and play out of nowhere. And they've got another one lined up now in Jeff Wilson. He's going to be the guy who most likely steps up this week and plays. He came in last week and did an excellent job for them. He 15 carries for 61 yards off of the bench. And then he also had 9 targets in the passing game. He made 8 receptions for 73 yards. This guy can play. So why they push Breida to the brink, I don't really understand. Anyway, if you're in a fantasy league and you really are sort of desperate for someone in your backfield, Jeff Wilson could be your guy. He's a better pass catcher than Alfred Morris. He's already proven that he can play this game. He's got a bit of a tough matchup this week, but I would still grab him if you're looking for a flex. I think he's worth hanging on to as far as that goes. Breida could miss more than 1 week here, so if you can pick Wilson up and stash him away, I would. All right, let's move on to one of the guys that we lost this week. This was an important loss because A.J. Green has a reputation of playing through injuries every year, but he's finally aggravated this one to the point where he can't play and requires, I believe he needs surgery. Is that correct?
Yeah, so he suffered torn ligaments in his big toe, the same one that kept him out the last 5 weeks. He is going to undergo surgery. Right now, they're saying the recovery time is going to be around 3 to 4 months. We are showing a much longer 30-week optimal recovery time. I believe he's going to miss most of the off-season workouts, OTAs. I think he'll probably slowly work his way back during the preseason next year and has a decent chance of playing week 1. But his injury risk is going to continue to be high. As we've talked about before on this podcast, he had issues with that toe back in 2014 and missed around a month. Then he just missed 5 weeks. We said heading into week 13 that I think he was still at a 27% chance of re-injury, which it falls into that high category. It's a concerning level. So unfortunately, it was not exactly surprising to see him get re-injured. This is going to be a very tough injury for him to recover from, just because, as we've mentioned before, again, the big toe, every single movement a wide receiver has to make starts with the big toe, pushing off, route running, jumping, cutting. So it's going to be a tough one for him to really get back to 100%. But I do think he'll be back out on the field next year, just not quite as the same player we've seen him at his peak.
Yeah. And of course, we've had a lot of questions about what happens now that Green is gone. What happens to the value of the other players in the passing game for the Bengals? And we really have the same problem going forward that we've had the last couple of weeks, and that is that Jeff Driscoll is your quarterback. So while guys like Tyler Boyd and John Ross will continue to have some value, especially Boyd, who's really the number one receiver there now. I expect he'll continue to have some value going forward, but he's more like a WR2, WR3 than he is a WR1 with Jeff Driscoll at the helm. And Ross is more like a WR3, WR4, maybe what the heck kind of flex play more than anything else with Driscoll at the helm. It's tough, but it's tough to really to evaluate how well the Bengals receivers are going to play with Driscoll behind the helm, especially when they've got a matchup against a team like the Chargers this week, who can be pretty tough against the pass. They have the Raiders and the Browns coming up in weeks 15 and 16, so it'll be nice to see if Driscoll can develop a nice rapport with Boyd uh, going forward. Uh, so this game is worth watching, if for nothing else, certainly to look ahead for the next 2 weeks. So, you know, if I needed a receiver, if I had to have a receiver, I'd use Boyd. But if I could avoid the receivers at all for Cincinnati, I definitely would. And that's sort of the outlook going forward with them. And we have a similar sort of a situation with the Denver Broncos, who lost Emmanuel Sanders this week. What is Sanders' long-term outlook for 2019?
So Sanders obviously tore his Achilles yesterday at practice. It was a non-contact injury. That's often how these Achilles tendon tears take place. Um, it takes most players roughly 10 to 11 months to return to the field, and then another month or two to really get back into game shape and feel comfortable out there. So I don't see Sanders being ready to go at the start of next season. Maybe he should target roughly an October return. But then even when he does come back, he'll be at a higher risk of suffering another lower body injury. We see a lot of players that come back from Achilles tears suffer calf strains, foot sprains, knee sprains, other things like that, because they're trying to overcompensate, or their body just isn't ready to be out there, playing in an NFL game. So unfortunately, I think 2019 is going to be a very tough season for Sanders.
And of course, our listeners want to know, how is this going to affect Case Keenum and the other Broncos wide receivers? Unfortunately, things have not been looking good for Case Keenum and the rest of the Broncos receivers on general principle. Anyway, over the last few weeks, Case Keenum's production has gone from an average, somewhere around 260, 270 yards per game, down to, well, just about 200, maybe 190 yards per game. His last three games: 205 yards, 197 yards, and 150 yards, 151 yards. And he's got three touchdowns over the last three games. And, numbers like that are a real problem when it comes to fantasy production. I mean, he's just not putting up anywhere near the kind of numbers he was putting up earlier in the season. Moving forward, now he doesn't have Sanders anymore, so he's really got just the one receiver to play with in terms of talent. It's not that guys like Deshaun Hamilton and Tim Patrick don't have any talent, but they picked up Andre Holmes to round out their squad. They're in trouble as far as the receiving game goes. Holmes is nothing more than a possession receiver out of the slot, maybe. Um, you've got just Sutton really going forward. I don't see how you can actually even use Keenum in fantasy play through the playoffs now. You've got to come up with an alternative if you possibly can. I know I'm gonna bench Keenum in my league, where I've had him sitting on the bench anyway for the last few weeks. He's not going to find playing time for me during the playoffs. And at this point, I think really most fantasy teams are going to have to set him aside and hope that they can get production elsewhere. All right, let's finish this up this week with a few quick hits and talk about some players who've missed some time already. Won't be back this week, but could be back in the following weeks. And I'm talking first of all about running back Kerryon Johnson of the Detroit Lions. What's the story with Johnson?
So he is improving, but he is yet to practice this week and is still at least a week away from his optimal recovery time. Good news here is he's no longer a high injury risk. He's moved into that elevated category, which is an improvement. And his health performance factor is still below average, but it looks like by next week it could improve to that above average category, which means we would actually expect him to play relatively well if he can take the field in week 15.
All right. And, if you're relying on LeGarrette Blount to be your running back, this might not be a bad week for him, as the Lions are going to be facing the Arizona Cardinals, who just don't have much of a defense at all. It may be worthwhile sending Blount out there if you have to, especially if you're relying on him for something like a flex spot. He's certainly not an RB1. He's very much touchdown dependent, no matter when he plays or how he plays. So this might be a good week to get him in there if you need to as a flex. All right, Melvin Gordon. Can we expect Gordon back anytime soon?
So Gordon is in a similar position to Kerryon Johnson, just 1 week behind. When he went down with that MCL sprain, which we're showing as a grade 2 moderate sprain, we gave him a 4-week optimal recovery time, which means he shouldn't return until week 16. This week is sounding very unlikely. He hasn't practiced yet. He said he's walking without a limp, but it's still very sore. So I'm not optimistic that he'll be able to play. If for some reason he does, he's at a very high risk of re-injury right now. By week 15, he should improve a little bit, but week 16 is really the best target for him.
Yep, and the situation really is the same uh, for the Chargers as it was last week. Austin Eckler's going to get the start. Justin Jackson will get his. Eckler's more of the pass catcher out of the backfield, while Jackson will probably get his share of carries in the running game. It'll be interesting to see how they break it out. Last week it was somewhat even. I think we may see that again this week and going forward if he ends up playing next week as well. If Gordon ends up being out next week also. All right, last guy we want to talk about here is Gus Edwards of the Ravens. He looks healthy and is going to play, right, Virginia?
Yes, so he is not on the Ravens injury report anymore as of this week. He didn't look great last week, but he had 21 carries for 82 yards. I think he was okay. We gave him a 2-week optimal recovery time, which means by week 14 he should be good to go. And he's back at a low injury risk. So I'm not too concerned about Gus Edwards going forward.
Right. I thank you. I'm glad you said that because I'm going to be starting him this week again. All right. That's all we've got for you this week on the Inside Edge. I'm sorry, the Inside Injuries podcast, where you get the inside edge on injuries all around the NFL, the NBA, and in other leagues throughout the year. You can send your questions to us at Inside Injuries on Twitter, and you can also send them to me at Tim's Tens, TIMSTENZ. And you can also send them to Virginia. Virginia, please give them your Twitter handle.
At VZakas, ZAKAS.
All right. And please don't forget, do not set your lineups without checking on InsideInjuries.com on Sunday for the very, very latest on the injuries around the NFL. We will help you set the most effective lineup if you send us your questions and check in with us to make sure you get the very latest news on the injuries and the injured players around the NFL. I'm Tim McCullough. She's Virginia Zakas. We will see you again next week for week 15. Thank you.